And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Richard Nixon is a name that summons Watergate, the Cold War, and the enduring image of a presidency that fell from the highest office in the land to a quiet life spent rebuilding reputation. In popular culture, he's the figure of raised V signs and late-night punchlines, but he's also the only American president who made a startling choice after leaving office. Unlike the small fraternity of commanders-in-chief who accepted government protection for life as a matter of course, Nixon sent word he would take a different route. After the pardon, the hospital stays, the deaths, the gradual return to the public eye, and the long march towards rehabilitation, he arrived at a decision that set him apart from every other former president. Let's look at why he was the only president to give up Secret Service protection. Resignation, pardon, and aftermath.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
And to walk along a wooden walkway which has been constructed. This is, I believe, the limousine which the president was in, and I'm not sure.
It is. The president and Mrs. Nixon are in it.
Are they still in it?
We can see it from our...
Okay, well,
let's just back up to the diplomatic reception room.
Right. What they've done is circled around West Executive Avenue and re-entered the southwest gate where they departed from this morning. Yeah, that's Bob Taylor, the head of the Secret Service detail, standing at the door entrance as Mr. Nixon gets out. And immediately behind him, the First Lady. The President taking off a top coat, which I'm sure he needed today as he was standing and waving, giving it to his Secret Service agent.
From whom he borrowed it, I guess.
Agent Taylor. Fortunately, they're about the same size. And now he goes back into the reception room.
When Richard Nixon resigned, August 9, 1974, Gerald Ford took the oath and sought to calm a shaken country with a line that still frames the era. He told Americans, "Our long national nightmare is over." The moment closed one chapter, but didn't quiet the storms that followed Nixon out of the White House and into private life. 1 month later, on September 8th, President Ford issued a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States, which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 20th, 1969 through August 9th, 1974. The text left little room for ambiguity, and the country split over whether mercy served justice. Nixon hesitated because he knew acceptance would be read as an admission. Friends and advisors urged him to weigh the practical realities of a long legal fight, the difficulty of finding an impartial jury, and the cost that would mount as months turned to years. The pardon calmed one storm while stirring another. Nixon returned home a weakened figure, no longer shielded by the office, and faced the harsh light of a public still processing Watergate. The transition set the stage for a period of illness, debt, and quiet planning that would eventually reshape his post-presidential life. Convalescence, debt, and the first steps back.
The unhappiest people of the world are those in the watering places, the international watering places like the south coast of France and Newport and Palm Springs and Palm Beach, going to parties every night, playing golf every afternoon, then bridge, drinking too much, talking too much, thinking too little, retired, no purpose. And so, while I know there are those who totally would disagree with this and say, gee, boy, if I could just be a millionaire, that would be the most wonderful thing. If I could just not have to work every day, if I could just be out fishing or hunting or playing golf or traveling, that'd be the most wonderful life in the world. They don't know life.
The year that followed was defined by illness and isolation. In October, Nixon underwent surgery to remove a blood clot in his leg, then suffered internal bleeding that required another operation. Recovery took time, and the image that reached the public was of a former president adrift and diminished. Even in that valley, he reverted to habits that had carried him through earlier setbacks. He mapped a path to solvency, because money problems could not be ignored. Legal bills tied to Watergate had climbed past $1 million, and there were back taxes that demanded attention. Numbers, deadlines, and contracts took the place of rallies and motorcades. He signed a lucrative memoir agreement and delivered R.N., the Memoirs of Richard Nixon, in 1978, which became a bestseller and steadied his finances. He also sat for a paid series of conversations with David Frost in 1977, a choice that critics called a cash grab and supporters framed as a moment of candor. The convalescent image began to fade as work resumed. Each small step was practical rather than grand. He paid what he owed, rebuilt a platform for speaking and writing, and found his way into rooms where the conversation turned from scandal to policy. The focus on solvency and routine created conditions for a broader return. From San Clemente to a new routine and wider world.
I am going to continue to work for peace among all nations. I'm going to continue to work for opportunity and understanding among our people here in America. And I am going to continue, and we are all going to continue, to be very proud of the fact that we, like you, are Californians, and that we're home again. Thank you.
By the late 70s, he started inching back onto the world stage. He returned to China in 1976 and found that many abroad saw Watergate as a domestic drama rather than a disqualifying sin. Encounters with foreign leaders reminded him that his name still carried weight in international circles. His first public speech after leaving office was delivered in Kentucky, a modest venue that allowed him to test how a friendly room might respond. It was not a triumphant tour, but measured progress. Speaking to supporters gave him a template for re-entering public life without inviting chaos. The Nixons moved to New York in 1980, then to Saddle River, New Jersey, where family rhythm replaced West Coast seclusion. These moves mattered for security planning because routes, residences, and daily patterns shape protection needs. The change from a coastal compound to a suburban home shifted the footprint of any protective team and influenced budgets, staffing, and coordination with local authorities. He also widened his influence through counsel and books. He advised Jimmy Carter on normalizing relations with China in 1978 and spoke quietly with Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush about foreign affairs. Titles such as Real Peace and No More Vietnams supported a rebranding as strategist rather than headline maker. A 1986 Newsweek cover declared, "He's back," and that sentiment captured the moment when his rehabilitation seemed to have traction. The context built by these years would matter when he weighed a unique security decision in the mid-1980s. Protection policy and Nixon's break with tradition. To understand why Nixon's choice stood out, we should review how protection worked. Under a 1965 law, the president and vice president were required to accept Secret Service protection. Former presidents and their spouses were included on a permanent protection roll, but the statute drew a clear distinction. Only the president and vice president had to accept the detail. Others could make a different choice. In practice, no former president ever said no. Guarding ex-presidents extended far beyond motorcades and rope lines. It involved residents' command posts, advance teams, and decisions about air travel when routes looked risky. In Nixon's case, the footprint first existed in California and later moved to the East Coast, which altered staffing and costs as his life changed. Costs were trending higher by the early 80s. The Secret Service told Congress in 1982 that protection of former presidents and their wives totaled $10.7 million that year, and by the mid-80s, that broader figure was believed to be about $26 million. The agency's overall budget stood at $286.5 million for the year. Estimates for Nixon's own protection ran near $3 million annually, a number that concentrated public attention on a single line item. Inside the family, there was partial precedent. Pat Nixon had already requested an end to her protection the prior year. The command post at the Saddle River estate had been refurbished and maintained at his expense, which showed a willingness to shoulder part of the burden. The culture of the Secret Service, with a long history of coordinating alongside private teams, also made a transition thinkable if the principal insisted. The decision became public with a brief note delivered by hand to Treasury Secretary James A. Baker III, whose department oversaw the Secret Service. John Taylor, Nixon's assistant, told reporters that a complete study of the former president's security needs had been commissioned and the decision would be implemented after. There would be no security gap. The Secret Service would remain in place until private guards were hired and fully integrated. Taylor's explanation for the motive was concise. He said Nixon's sole reason was to save the government money. The widely reported estimates for Nixon's federal protection, paired with rising costs for the broader category of former presidents and their spouses, gave the claim a concrete frame. The legal context supported the move. The 1965 law required only the sitting president and vice president to accept protection. Others could choose. How the private model worked and why it fit Nixon's life. The transition that followed was designed to be uneventful. Nixon's team evaluated private firms, vetted personnel, and set clear lines of communication with local law enforcement in Saddle River and the places he visited often. The goal was a one-for-one swap in capability that did not reduce coverage or increase risk. Nixon's command post at home had already been upgraded and maintained at his expense, which made it a ready base for a private team. Day-to-day routines for executive protection remained familiar. Drivers, advance checks, controlled entries, and residential posts continued. The difference was who issued the paychecks and how the team integrated with local agencies. In the years that followed, the switch faded from public view for a simple reason. It worked without producing a crisis or inviting imitation. Nixon continued to write and advise, publishing books such as Real Peace, No More Vietnams, 1999, Victory Without War, In the Arena, Seize the Moment, and Beyond Peace. When he died in 1994 from complications of a stroke, his funeral drew every living president, and Bill Clinton urged the country to judge him by his entire life and career. The security decision sits within the broader arc as a practical choice tailored to his circumstances. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think Nixon's choice was a practical way to save taxpayers' money? Let us know in the comments section below.